That makes it
Hare Krishna. I'm joined today by Hari Dham Prabhu, an old friend from the UK. Hari Dham Prabhu reached out to me and suggested we consider some interviews of devotees who've experienced traumatic abuse and are dealing with it. Someone might ask, well, he didn't go to Gurukul. How's this relevant? He's a devotee and he's dealing with the effects of abuse in his life. And yeah, I thought that might be an interesting thing. And the offer's also there to others, if anyone wishes to talk about their experiences and how they've dealt with them and so on. So I'd like to thank you, Haridama, for offering to go first and doing the pioneering work. Tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, how long you've been a devotee, all of those kind of things.
well. How much time do you have, Damodar? Thank you very much for this opportunity. It is a unique opportunity. I've never spoken about my experiences in a public forum, but I'm happy to do so. And I'm sure that there will be a question to ask me, why have I decided to do this interview? But to put things into context, I was born in South Africa in 1957 into an Afrikaner household, and which means by implication that we grew up in a racist environment under the apartheid regime of the National Party at the time. And of course, in those days, they were preaching that you should love your neighbor as you would love yourself. But unfortunately, if your neighbor had a skin other than your color, then they became your servant. Not that we had neighbors of different skin colors, of course. So I grew up in that apartheid era. I left home very early in my life at 16 to go to university. And then from university, I graduated into the performing arts. And I really made my career as a professional actor, stage, television, film, and radio. But it never really brought me any particular happiness. And then I branched into journalism and public relations. And even that didn't bring me any internal happiness. And of course, just to put it into a greater context, in the Afrikaner culture, the father is the head of the family, which gives him ownership of the family. And the Afrikaner culture is known for its high rate of suicide, so of family suicide. So if the father decides to kill himself, he takes the family with him, because he owns his family. So I grew up under that sort of a rather suppressive regime, to call it for want of a better word. And I escaped that, as I said, at the age of 16. And I went away as far as I possibly can from home to Cape Town, and I was living in the northern part of South Africa. And then I was conscripted to the South African Defence Force for 2 years of national service, during which I trained as a military combat officer, Green Beret, and I was then dispatched to the Angolan Bush War, where we fought the Cubans, infiltrating our borders in support of the African National Council, which was an outlawed party at the time. And that was a very disturbing part of my upbringing. And I decided that once they called me again for a 3-month stint back to this war zone, I decided to leave South Africa as a political refugee in December of 1985. But before then, in June of 1985, I was at an emotional low. So low that I decided that my best option would be to end my life. For reasons that will become apparent during the course of this interview. But I think Krishna had another plan for me, and by his grace, I happened to be dispatched by a newspaper editor to write an expose on the Hare Krishna cult. Just on the outskirts of Johannesburg. And on the day I arrived to write my story and expose this cult, it was a Sunday feast. And at that particular love feast was a very charismatic, good-looking, well-dressed, and well-jeweled, I may add, guru by the name of Bhagavan Goswami. And of course, I was smitten by his words and his appearance and his charisma. And all the questions that I had internally was answered without even posing a question to him verbally.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, this is not a fluke. This is not by chance. I never wrote the story. And I joined the Hare Krishnas on that very day. And it saved my life. And in December of 1985, I fled South Africa as a refugee to continue my life in the United Kingdom, where I still am.
Yeah, I remember meeting you there in the 80s at Soho Street. Fond recollections. And in your life as a devotee, you've been a communications team professional. You've been a CPO officer and so on. Tell us a little bit about your life in ISKCON.
Well, it took me 10 years to get initiated by His Holiness Mukunda Goswami. We met, and there was an instant connection because he came from an artistic background, being a jazz musician. I came from a performing background, so we had something in common. We both had communication skills, public relations. He was the communications director of ISKCON at the time, so there was another connection there. But I waited from 1985 until 1995 to take my initiation from Mukunda Goswami. And in 1996, he dispatched me to India as the communications director for Srila Prabhupada's centennial celebrations, which I was most grateful for. It went very well and it was a success. And then I was also appointed as the communications director for ISKCON and the United Kingdom. And under the tutelage of Champakalata Devidasi at the time, I did the training course to be a CPO, and I did the second training course to be a judge. That didn't last very long, and unfortunately came to an abrupt end because I wouldn't toe the status quo line on child abuse. I was very vigorous about this. I was uncompromising in my approach to the perpetrators. I wasn't going to allow management to dictate to me how to do it, when to do it, who to do it with. I was my own man, and that didn't sit very well with the local temple management, and I was dismissed on the spot without rhyme or reason. Since then, I've continued serving Srila Prabhupada's devotees by developing and delivering spiritual care workshops for dying devotees. in Vrindavan and in Mayapur, in Germany, and so forth. And that's what I'm currently engaged in, is to teach devotees how to take care of dying devotees. So that's really my short history with ISKCON.
Yeah, thank you, Prabhu. And these days you work as a paramedic?
Well, I've believe it or not, I have reached retirement age when I turned 65 2 years ago. So I've left the London Ambulance Service, and I now work as a repatriation medic for a private ambulance service. And I teach the subject at the University College of London, just to keep myself busy. And yeah, so I'm semi-retired. I'm an old age pensioner, believe it or not. I have a freedom pass to travel for free all over London.
And you're a husband and a father.
And I am a very happy husband, and I am an exalted father. It's the best role that's ever been bestowed upon me, as being a father of a lovely daughter, Sandhya, who's graduating in May of this year in psychology, and it's just the best part of my life.
Yeah, I found myself, the opportunity to lovingly raise a child is actually one of the best antidotes to childhood trauma and adverse child experiences and so on. So just to clarify, when you were in the CPO, which sounds like it was about 15 years ago, something like that, there was undue pressure coming from various quarters that you, I guess, ease up on some of the offenders or something along those lines. You sort of hinted at something to look towards that.
Yes, I mean, some of the offenders or perpetrators were identified to me, and I was sort of given a caseload. And I think that my approach may have been a little bit too rigorous, to put it mildly. That I wasn't going to allow management to interfere with due process, because I had the training, I have personal experience, which we will cover in this interview. And I wasn't going to be a yes man. I was going to do it according to my conviction and in the interest of the victim. And that didn't find particular favor with the local temple management.
Mm.
And I was just dismissed via an email out of America that your service are no longer required.
Anyway, thank you for all you've done in that regard. So, we've often discussed on Vedic Inquirer that there are different types of abuse, and each of them may have different lifelong impacts and so on. Tell us as much as you want to about, what you experienced growing up and how it's impacted you.
Well, before I answer that question, Damodar Prabhu, would you mind if I give some clarity to why I wanted to do this?
Please.
As you know, I'm a great fan and a supporter of Vedic Inquirer. I follow it. I contribute to it, and I've noticed that I didn't quite hear or see or read the voice of the victim. And I'm sure there are very good reasons why that may well be the case. And I thought, well, maybe it's the right time for a victim, and you're rightly saying I wasn't at the Gurukul, but I have some experience from which others may benefit in the course of this interview. And I thought that maybe it's time that a victim steps forward and shares his or her experiences and the impact that it has, what it is like to be in the victim role. And in the hope that if there are victims out there that may listen to this or look at this interview, can take something away from it that may not change their life, but it may just make the penny drop. It may just tweak a thought process or help a thought process that has maybe been there but not quite expanded on. So, and of course, I think voice should be given to the victims in more than one way. So that's predominantly the reasons why I decided to come forward and talk about my experience.
Thank you, Prabhu, and I hope it does. I hope it does prompt others, if they feel comfortable to do so, in sharing, and that it does provide sort of useful learning and support for others. So I really appreciate your taking that brave step. So yeah, please tell us as much as you wish to about what you experienced growing up.
Well, my so as you rightly say, Damodar Prabhu, there is a variety of types of abuse, and I think it's common knowledge what those types are. So I'm not going to really repeat that. My own personal experience was that I suffered from quite a few of those types of abuses, and it was predominantly around physical, sexual, and psychological. And it was perpetrated against me as early as the age of 5. And it ran until the age of about 16, just before I left South Africa and before I left school to go to university at the age of 17. And it was perpetrated by 2 people that one would look up to. So the first one was my biological father, and that was predominantly physical. And then I had the traumatic experience of witnessing him drown at sea on their 10th wedding anniversary and the day before my 7th birthday. And that was the 4th of January, 1964. So 60 years ago, last January. So that was physical. And if I mean physical, I mean violence. Violence against myself and violence against my mother because of alcohol abuse in the household. And then my mother got married very soon after my father drowned. And my stepfather then became the second perpetrator. And that was predominantly psychological and sexual. And this went on from the age of 7 until 16. And lo and behold, and with hindsight, I only realized many years after that I was actually part of a pedophile ring. And it never really dawned upon me at the time, because I remember one school teacher, our dentist, and a friend of a dentist were running a pedophile ring in which they were circulating, for want of a better word, young boys amongst them. And I happened to be one of those boys. So those were the various types of abuse. And I don't really want to go into any particular detail
Understandable.
of what it entailed, because I don't think that's necessary. But yeah, that was my experience.
And what kind of impact did it have, both immediate on you at that time in terms of your growing up? Sometimes people talk about it impacting, mood and behaviors as a child, or ability to study or discipline or whatever, things like that. But also, prolonged or delayed impacts that might have affected your relationships later in life, or your self, perception, or other things. Just, yeah, how does that all manifest?
I mean, I was quite an achiever at school. So that certainly affected my ability to perform at my best level. And that was noticed by my teachers, that there was a sudden change in having been performing well academically, recreationally, on the sports field, and also a mood change. I became sort of isolated, unsociable. I was bullied at school, which compounded the sexual and psychological and physical abuse at home. So I was bullied at school, and it really sort of dampened my spirit. And the long-term impact that it had on me, as you just alluded to earlier on, was trusting people with whom I have an intimate relationship with. I couldn't trust very easily, especially those that I entered into a relationship with. I couldn't trust them. And the other thing that it caused was a great confusion about my sexuality. We have a saying in my language, vroeg rijp, vroeg vrot. And if I translate, that means early ripe, early rotten. So having been exposed to sexual activity at such a young age is really confusing and bewildering. And it made me question my sexuality. Am I asexual? Am I bisexual? Am I homosexual? Am I heterosexual? I didn't know. So that stayed with me for quite a while, and it took me many decades until I finally got to grips with that in the year 2000. So that's 24 years ago that I decided I can enter into a relationship with a female and make that last. But before then, it was in and out of relationships, not being able to trust, not being able to open up, not being able to be intimate. So those are the three areas that it impacted upon me: the intimate relationships, the trust, and sexuality.
You
And of
mentioned,
course, yeah.
no, I apologize. Please finish.
And I am often asked, do you ever really heal from this sort of sustained abuse and bullying? And I've come to realize that I don't think that you do. I think that you learn to live with it. You learn to accept it. You learn to live with it, and you learn to accommodate around it. But it's something that I think I will take to the grave with me. You were asking a question.
Yeah, you mentioned, I think it was in around 1985, that you also had thoughts even of just ending your own life. Was this related in some ways?
Yes, it was, because I didn't go for any particular treatment. It wasn't talked about. It wasn't believed. So when I did speak to my mother about it, or my teachers, they didn't believe me. They didn't think that it could happen. It was a time when, if you even considered to go for therapy or treatment, that you are considered to be insane or you are mad. Those were the terminologies that were banded around at the time, because that was the culture of the 50s and the 60s. Yes, back to your question again. I've lost my thought here.
Yeah, just I wondered if that idea of contemplating suicide was related
Yes,
with this.
it was related on the one end. That's a very good question, Damodar Prabhu. That was one part of it. The other part, the other side of the coin, was that I had reached the pinnacle of success at a very early age in my life. I became very famous. I became very rich. I was very successful at running various careers at the same time. But so materially, very successful, but emotionally bankrupt. And these two things were in conflict with one another. And I couldn't sustain any relationship. And some of the relationships that I entered into also became violent. So there was this pattern that was repeating itself. There was a perpetuation of my childhood experiences into my student days, into my youth, and so forth. And this made me very depressed and very unhappy. And I realized that, but luckily, it is just in my karma that I came to this thought that if I can be so successful materially, and I know the recipe for that, surely there must be a recipe to be spiritually successful, because I understood that there was an opposite to matter, and the opposite to matter was spirit. But I didn't know what that recipe was. But I knew that I had to find it, because if I didn't find a solution to my material problems, there was no other way than suicide. And I think my intense desire and my intense pain to try and find this elusive happiness, internal happiness, was heard by Krishna. And he made the arrangements for me to come into the association of devotees, ISKCON, Srila Prabhupada's books, and then ultimately Mukunda Goswami. And I think that was the rescue package that I was really, really looking for. And it came just at the right time.
You mentioned earlier that you're not sure healing is ever really possible. It's about learning to live with these things. What have you found has enabled you to overcome any of the dysregulation or any of the pain, the suffering, or effects of trauma, particularly debilitating effects? What's allowed you to become as functional as possible in society?
Well, I came to the realization that scars can heal, but they don't disappear. So I knew that there was a way of getting out of this doldrum. But I also realized that spirituality or chanting Hare Krishna is not going to be the solution. Chant and be happy. It doesn't come cheaply. I also realized that there was no benefit in me putting a plaster over a boil. I need to lynch that boil. But at the same time, I also realized that what I have now would not have been if it wasn't for what I had experienced in the past. So my past shaped my future. And in a way, I wouldn't have it any other way. So I have no regrets. I have no regrets. Of course, I was very angry. I was very disillusioned. I was even hateful that I had been exposed to this awful, heinous crimes for so long, and all my perpetrators got away with it. They were not accountable to anybody, not to the law of the land, and some of them died. And I could not face them or approach them or make them understand what it had done to me. But at the same time, I also thought that I need to take responsibility for the effects that this has had on me. And I thought, well, what does that responsibility look like? And one of the first things I realized is I need to talk about it. I need to talk about it to friends, to trusted colleagues, and now I'm talking to you about it. And I need to talk about it to professionals. And luckily, I am married to a devotee who is a professional in counseling and therapy. And talking therapies has made a huge difference for me. Not just talking therapies in the sense that it's me and a professional, but also in group therapy. So psychodynamic group therapy, I went through that. I went through couple therapy because it had an effect upon my marriage and my relationship with my wife. So I went for group therapy. I went for transformational workshops. I went for individual psychodynamic therapy. And it all helped. But I think underpinning all of that, I had the ability to also forgive. Not to let my perpetrators off the hook, but to let me off the hook, so that I don't remain their victim for the rest of my life. And I understood this victimhood concept, that if I allow this to haunt me, to affect the way I function as a human being, I continue to remain their victim. And that's not fair upon myself or anyone else that comes into my close association. So, in a nutshell, I went to therapy. I, to this day, talk about it. I don't have any regrets about it. I have no shame about it. But it's something I wish didn't happen to me. And it's something that I don't wish upon my worst enemy, not that I have any. Because it cannot be erased. You can't erase it. It'll always be there. It will go with me to my grave. The only difference is that it doesn't impact on my functionality as a human being any longer.
You've talked about the value of being able to safely discuss these things with trained professionals. What do you feel the therapeutic process does? I'm saying that because I know some people have misgivings, some people, sometimes it's stigmatized or whatever. From your perspective, how exactly did it help?
Hearing myself talk. It's like vomiting out that pain through verbal communication. Finding a common denominator in other people. Being able to share with other people who have had similar experiences. Finding that connectedness, that I'm not on my own. There are other people out there too that have had similar, if not worse, experiences. It's not about remaining in my cave because I'm just punishing myself. And do I deserve any more punishment than what I've had? No, I don't. So, and of course, the therapies that I've been through is not about coming to a solution. It's not a magic wand that you walk in and you walk out a different person. It just gives you that cognitive ability through talking to process the pain, to give meaning to the experience, to put it into a perspective where you can put it on a pedestal and look at it externally, not always internalize it and giving it to yourself. It's really just about heart connectedness and not just let the head lead, but let the heart lead. And I found that was quite therapeutic for me.
Apologies. By contrast, how do you find discussions with devotees in general about this? You've talked about the value of trained professionals. Of course, some devotees, like your wife, are trained professionals. But in general, when you think about the nature of these conversations in the contemporary devotee society, helpful, problematic, mixed, what's your experience?
The word that jumps to mind is problematic.
What do you think is the difficulty that devotees have in being able to just hear these things?
It's a lack of intimacy. And I take away a wonderful lesson from my spiritual master. And he said to me, Haridam, create a circle of influence with like-minded devotees. So I've managed to associate with devotees with whom I have an intimate relationship with, where there is trust, where there is no judgment, where they just accept me for who I am. And I'm not looking for their empathy, and I'm looking for their sympathy either. I just want to be able to connect with them on a level that I didn't find very easy in ISKCON. Because although we have a very personal philosophy, I find my experience since 1985 to be rather impersonal with the devotees. Because often I heard, well, it's in your karma. You have to just accept it. What happens to you is because you deserve it. These cultish stock phrases does no one any good. It's impersonal, it's cold, it's unempathic. In actual fact, I think it's harmful. So what I've learned is that I have this group of devotees with whom I can share my experiences, and I will feel safe in their association and their company. But I think generally ISKCON is pretty, what's the word? Uneducated, ill-informed about the effects of child abuse upon an individual. And we can see it, you know, I mean, you know, I don't want to invent the wheel here. We can see it on the Vedic Inquirer site. You know, the lack of understanding from our leaders. I mean, it's self-evident that they just don't get it. It's not a priority for them. Lack of empathy, lack of education, lack of training, lack of experience. So, very difficult.
And I suspect that the complexity is compounded if one suffered particularly that abuse at the hands of devotees. Like, how do you then trust devotees later, the same people who are apparently the holy men, the holy women? I imagine that could derange one's relationship with Krishna consciousness if it was actually served out in an abusive way, and certainly make one very reticent to ever trust again in that company.
Damodar, for me, it's unimaginable to think that I'm coming to a spiritual organization where I'm sexually abused. For me, it's unimaginable. Because most of the, I mean, you know that there are various reasons why people join Krishna consciousness. And one of those reasons is because they are just so disillusioned with the material world. They're in such a personal, emotional low. They try and find solace and rescue by joining an organization that propounds, you know, this wonderful philosophy of personalism and bhakti and prema. And they, honestly, I struggle to express myself how those victims must feel, that they've been abused by the very people who they have surrendered to for their ultimate spiritual happiness. It's just makes me shiver.
So, Prabhu, again, a massive thank you for telling your story and sharing with us, by taking that bold step. And I share your hope that it will embolden others to consider doing this, and that there's much utility for those either in understanding the impacts of abuse or in coming to terms with one's own abuse from these stories being shared in public. Are there any sort of closing comments or areas that we didn't get to before we wind up?
No, I think your questions were very insightful, and I'm happy with what you've asked and how I've responded. I think in summary, I would just say that talk about it. Don't suffer in silence. You are not to be blamed. But at the same time, don't continue to remain the victim.
Thank you, Prabhu. And yes, in my closing comments, if there are others of you watching this, apart from commenting in the thread, and please do bear in mind that there might still be fresh pain there. So let's try and keep the threads constructive and supportive and so on. But if you also feel that you want to be able to tell your story, or there might be some value, you'll notice with this one, we didn't go live. We recorded it and posted it later. And that's just one extra step of safety, I suppose, that we think might be appropriate with these kind of situations. Please, please reach out if you feel like you'd like to tell your story, and we perhaps have a little interview beforehand and make sure that that story is shared in the most helpful way possible, supportive to you and helpful to others. Big thank you to you, Hari Dham Prabhu, for setting the wheels in motion, and for bravely sharing your story. And yeah, Hare Krishna.
Thank you for the opportunity. Hare Krishna.
Haribol.